I think the common security was something that came as many of us who are already movements. We come from movements that certainly envisioned the world as a place where I could not be safe if my neighbor was not safe as well. But to have this put into words by eminent politicians was something that made us take giant steps forward in our peace activism. I very much appreciate the way that we're now planning to readapt for the 21st century, what all that means. And I think the pandemic is also helping us out. I come from a different kind of political movement, but to me, Pastor's words last year when he said we will only be saved if we can all be saved fits into that picture entirely. So I'm delighted to be able to give the floor to start with to Helen Durham, who is the International Law and Policy Director of the ICRC. I remember that in the field of nuclear weapons, it was thanks to Bill Finger and then to my hero Marcel Junot, who went to Hiroshima in August 1945, that we actually began to understand, not me, I'm old, but I wasn't that old, to understand what had happened there. And therefore, using the what had happened there, we were able to construct our platform and our activism based on that. And the ICRC has been an ally forever and ever, and even the national Red Cross associations as well. So Helen, I know, is going to show us a short video as well. Is that right? Helen, you are most welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And it's really a great, not just honor, we say that quite lightly, but a real pleasure to not only be able to talk about this topic with all of us today, but to see so many faces of people that, as you rightly articulated, Lisa, have dedicated their life to this incredible issue. Now, right now, there's no doubt that the world is at a tipping point. I think there is a really clear understanding that big existential threats that we face cannot be contained within borders. They don't stay within jurisdictions, cannot be approached from an insular socioeconomic standing, and need to be acted upon fast to ensure that the wrong voices and the poor choices that perhaps politicians and others might make don't bring us to the brink. Now, this statement I just made could be applied to many of the significant challenges the world is facing, from climate to public health in relation to pandemics. But today we are talking about it through the prism of the most terrifying, the most destructive, and the most dangerous weapons that humans not only could imagine, but have created, and that is nuclear weapons. I did want to show just a very short clip. It's only a minute and a half, but I think it sets up probably more elegantly than I could do some of the challenges we face in relation to these weapons. So Stephanie, if I could ask you to please show a short film clip. Thank you.
There are almost 14,000 nuclear bombs in the world, thousands of which are ready to be used in an instant. Most are far more powerful than those that devastated Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. Since then, nuclear weapons have almost been used many times because of malfunctions, mishaps, false alarms, and misunderstandings. In 1995, for example, a research rocket launched to study the Northern Lights was mistaken for a nuclear missile and led the world to the brink of destruction. We know a nuclear explosion would lead to a catastrophe of unimaginable proportions. Yet the risk that nuclear weapons are used is higher today. Military incidences involving nuclear states and their allies are happening more and more often, and states are making explicit threats to use nuclear weapons. Agreements to eliminate existing arsenals are being abandoned as new nuclear weapons are being developed. We are on a dangerous path towards a new nuclear arms race. At the same time, digital technologies that now control nuclear weapons could be hacked to issue a false warning of an impending attack, or even worse, access the launch codes. The official line is that having nuclear weapons keeps us safe, yet the reverse is true. As long as nuclear weapons exist, there is a risk they can be used. All states must join the Nuclear Ban Treaty now and bring the nuclear weapons era to an end.
Thank you, Stephanie. It's short, it's sharp, but I thought it was a nice way to remind us of some of the challenges we face. Now, in this discussion today, there's an idea that we need to talk about some of the key concerns we have and from our different perspectives. So I wanted to flag the issue about the challenge currently if we want to move towards a world of eradication of these weapons, of the easily polarized political discourse at all levels. This capacity to have a shifting or almost an erosion of proper debate at political levels at all levels across the globe. So that's one challenge, this polarized political discourse. Another challenge I think we really need to reflect on is the increased use of technology on the battlefield and beyond. The increased use of cyber, of artificial intelligence, of autonomous weapon systems dramatically increase the capacity, not only for the use of these weapons, but for accidents, for these weapons to be used to be in the wrong hands, so to speak, not that there's any right hands, and for escalation, which I think when you combine artificial intelligence with some of these triggers, it's actually extremely serious. We need to take into account. And I think the third issue that I think we need to grapple with is, in a way, the ease in which most of the world's population, not obviously those of us here today, but most of the world's population don't have the threat of nuclear weapons front and foremost of their minds. I think that the excellent steps clearly have been taken, and we'll all talk I'm sure, about the new treaty, the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. But I do think that, very understandably, people are overwhelmed with so many challenges. It's sometimes difficult in the crowded space to make sure this issue is addressed correctly. But I think, like most challenges, and certainly if you're a humanitarian, you have to have optimism and you have to have hope. You have to be working to ensure that the status quo is changed. And I think one of the big things that we'll all talk about today, I have no doubt, is the entry into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which was really an historic achievement. I think if we look at the world today compared to a couple of years ago, we have a global norm which explicitly prohibits the use, the threat of use, the development, the production, the stockpiling and the testing of nuclear weapons. And I think the codification in a legal framework is very important. So I think that now that we have the treaty, there is a very clear message that nuclear weapons are not only morally unacceptable, but illegal under international humanitarian law, or the laws of war, which is something that the International Committee of the Red Cross and our colleagues in the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement stand for, and we could perhaps talk about that a little later. I think the other thing that we can't overlook in this space is that this new treaty also holds states accountable to help victims of nuclear testing and to clear up contaminated areas. So I think this element too is very, very important. So as you clearly expressed at the start, we've seen a huge shift from this issue being talked about through the prism of military security, and a shift over the last few years with much work being done, meetings held in Mexico, in Vienna, in Norway, a lot of work, many, many thousands in civil society, governments taking up the call too, but a strong shift from saying, hey, this impacts upon us all. So the political power discourse cannot be towards in a small space, and also needs to look at human security, or as you said more beautifully, I think, common security. I think another big shift that we see, which has optimism and makes my heart sing, is the evidence base, the scary but important evidence that no humanitarian organisation, and we do often go back in the ICRC to the past. I really love looking at the original telex that the original delegate at ICRC, the gentleman you mentioned, Mr. Marcel Dunon, sent back from Hiroshima only a couple of weeks after the use of that terrifying weapon. And in it, it says in this telex, mysterious impact, ... And today we don't, no one has the luxury. No one can say we don't understand the potential, not just human security, impact upon the environment, impact upon food security, and the whole range of things that accompany this. So I think the evidence and the fact that we can now say there is no humanitarian response that will deal with this situation, and therefore shift from saying, well, if you can't respond to something, the only opportunity, the only strategy you have is to eradicate. So it's clearly been a long journey for many of us, many, and for many before us. I look back, and for 75 years, my predecessors have been calling for a ban to these weapons. I won't go into the history. We're short of time. We've got so many rich things to hear today from many brilliant other panelists. But I do think we need to, in this area, look at the past to understand, look at the future with our modelling, look at the global environment in which we're living, and make sure that there are also other strong policy narratives that come out. Beyond and above the new treaty, we have to make sure, for example, that we remove nuclear weapons from the hair trigger alert status. We have to make sure that there's a pre-notification in military exercises that may involve the launch of these missiles. And we have to make sure that we reduce progressively the role of nuclear weapons in security policies. So there's a whole lot of work to do around the policy area, the legal area. And then finally, I wanted to flag, whilst I said I think the concern is that we've all raised our voices, and there was a flurry, and I'm sure many of you did this, and many interviews and some media at the time of the entry into force of the treaty, we need to do more in this space, because it is something that we know in the ICRC people care about once it's brought to their attention. We did a very, very big survey. I think there was 14 to 17,000 millennials, young people surveyed. And the results showed that 84% of these young people answered the question that the use of nuclear weapons should be never accepted. That the use of these weapons could be acceptable in some circumstances. But the vast majority of young people, when you put the question to them, had a deep concern. And they're the sort of voices I think the politicians, the leaders and decision makers need to hear. So going forward, I think we've got a great step with the new treaty. I think there's other work we can do in the policy space, other work we can do clearly in the space of educating people and making sure that it's the voice of the people that keep calling for their own common security. Thank you very much.
Helen, fantastic. Thank you so much. Also for your timing. I am so impressed. I could tell that you live in Switzerland, not in Italy. Brilliant. Thank you so much. You know, in Italy, we have noticed that now that we have city council resolutions in support of the ban treaty to ask the government, the Italian government, whether they will join, first go to the Vienna conference and then think about joining. We now, in our city councils, nobody dares vote against such a resolution. That is the stigma that is, and that reflects your opinion poll amongst the young people. We have the same. This is giving us such hope. It really is. If we talk about it properly, people use their heads and reason properly. Sorry, I'm not allowed to take up any time at all. Fumi-san, you told me I should call you Fumi.
Yes.
Fumihiko Yoshida is the visiting scholar at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and is a trustee also of the Sasakawa Peace Foundation. Would you like to take your 8 minutes, please?
Okay, thank you very much. Now I'm in Nagasaki. I'm with Nagasaki University. So today, I think that the best way to contribute this good, wonderful meeting is introduce you Nagasaki perspectives. So let me start my short presentation using the PowerPoint. Can you see this?
Yes, we see it very well. Thank you.
Well, very well-known, the best well-known, I think, the message from Nagasaki is let Nagasaki be the last. So I think this message has two implications. This is a general understanding here in Nagasaki. The first one is nuclear weapons must never be used after Nagasaki. And also finally, they must be abolished to avoid additional use of nuclear weapons. Well, those are very simple message, but I think those are very strong message from this place. Well, about must never be used. Hiroshima will be forever recorded in history as the first place. First, the city which was attacked by nuclear weapon. But in case of Nagasaki, it depends on our effort in the future. It could be. You may have a possibility to have a third or fourth or so-called nth city to be attacked by nuclear weapons. So by stopping it, by preventing it, Nagasaki can stay as the last city to be attacked by nuclear weapons. So that is a hope of the people in Nagasaki and also especially Hibakusha here in Nagasaki. And the important message we have heard from leaders from two superpowers, that is a message issued in Geneva 36 years ago and this year also. That is a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. So the bottom line of this the phrase in the joint statement is nuclear weapons must never be used. So this same kind of a context with the message from Nagasaki, I think. And another message that is must be abolished. So simple question: why the U.S. could use atomic bombs in 1945? That is simply because they had bombs. So as Helen said, until we eliminate all of these weapons, we still have a possibility of being, possibility of uses of these nuclear weapons. So to keep Nagasaki the last city, I think we need to eliminate nuclear weapons as soon as possible. So this is a poster the Nagasaki University make every year that shows a total amount of nuclear warheads in the world. And every year, the total number changes every year, but on the top, we place same message. As long as nuclear weapons exist, they can be used. So as you remember, President Kennedy said in 1961, that nuclear weapons must be abolished before they abolish us. So this is still true today. So bottom line is the same as the message from Nagasaki. Nuclear weapons must be abolished. And this is a message from UNGA, UNSG, who visited Nagasaki 3 years ago. And he gave this message before people in Nagasaki and the people in the world. So he said, let us all commit to making Nagasaki the last place on Earth to suffer nuclear devastation. So we need cultural commitment to keep Nagasaki the last place to have suffered from a nuclear explosion. So there is what we call Nagasaki Peace Doctrine. This is not just a message, sort of a policy guideline which we hope to be realized based on this guideline, many policies will be implemented based on this guideline. So the number one, our strategic appeal, let Nagasaki be the last. Number two, we have some implementation process envisioned. The first step is enhancement of nuclear taboo by emphasizing the message, nuclear weapons must never be used. And strengthening nuclear taboo and keeps Nagasaki the last place to be nuclear attacked. Then meanwhile, we have a chance to expand the effort towards the world free of nuclear weapons. For example, empowering the TPNW and lowering the role of nuclear weapons in the national security policies in the weapon states and its allies. And the third point, this is also important, as Mr. Guterres emphasized. We need global commitment to keep nuclear taboo and also enhance it as strong as possible. And that we will buy time. And we will make more efforts to head for the world free of nuclear weapons. So in this way, we people in Nagasaki would like to send stronger messages to people outside Nagasaki or outside Japan, so that we could outreach much more than now to send a message more widely by emphasizing this kind of Nagasaki Peace Doctrine. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. I think it's extraordinary that we should still have to be working towards the notion that Nagasaki should be the last city to ever be attacked by nuclear weapons. It seems to me something that has become part of history, that it was the last city. But I understand from those who have very clear political vision, and Helen as well told us, that the risks are becoming very serious again, as though we were back in the Cold War. But we do have hope. We in particular, who have worked for the TPNW, the ban treaty all these years, we do now have hope that, that we can move forward. If there is a quick question from one of the other panelists, so we can take it. And if not, I will be on Swiss time and move on towards our next speaker. I think I can move on then and be perfectly on time again. I am delighted and honored to be able to call on Sergio Duarte. Sergio Duarte, who is the president of the PAGOSH conferences, Nobel Peace Laureate on Science and World Affairs, but he's also the former UN High Representative for Disarmament Affairs. And in one of my first visits to a review conference, he was the president of the 2005 NPT Review Conference in New York. And so he was one of the people that I listened to in the early part of my nuclear disarmament career, which has not gone that far. Sergio, can I call on you to take your 8 minutes, please? You need to turn your microphone on, unmute yourself, as they say.
Now it's on. Well, good morning, everyone. It's morning here in Brazil, so I say good morning to you. I know that you are already in the afternoon. Thank you very much, Lisa, for introducing me. Thank you, Rainer, for inviting me to this interesting seminar. Others have said before me, and I agree entirely with that. We are living in an increasingly dangerous world. We have the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists advancing the doomsday clock to 2 minutes, the closest has been to midnight. And then we have the danger of climate change, another devastating pandemic. If this were not enough, humankind has to continue living under the threat of nuclear war. And some signs tell us that restraints on the use of nuclear weapons are weakening, as the doctrines of the nuclear weapon states contemplate what they call limited employment of these weapons. So the possibility of escalation to full nuclear confrontation seems a very worrisome possibility. Proposals to eliminate nuclear weapons are brushed aside by the political establishment of nuclear weapon countries and also their allies, and a large part of academia and also large part of the think tanks. So we have a trend that is increasingly worrisome. We have total military expenditures in the world in 2020 reaching almost $2 trillion. This is roughly what would be needed to achieve the 17 Sustainable Development Goals in developing countries, to end poverty, to improve health, education, reduce inequality, tackle climate change, and promote peaceful and inclusive societies. But the world seems to be going in the opposite direction. The 2018 Nuclear Posture Review asserts that the United States will only use the weapons in extreme circumstances. Of course, we don't know what these circumstances are, but they seem to include not only threats to the vital interests of the country, but also those of the allies and partners. And again, we don't know what their vital interests are. We know what our vital interest is, which is to get rid of these weapons. According to the review, conventional attacks can trigger a nuclear response by the United States. And even a preemptive use is not ruled out. American military expenditures in 2020 represented 40% of the total spent by the rest of the world in armaments. The Russian doctrine states that nuclear weapons can be used to defend Russia and its allies against both nuclear and conventional attacks. And any impending missile attacks will be assumed to be nuclear and will be responded in kind. Russia is busy modernizing its military force and recently announced the development of missiles that can travel at several times the speed of sound. New submarines armed with advanced nuclear weapons have been added to the Russian Pacific and Arctic Ocean fleets. China has not issued a similar document, that we know of, about nuclear weapons use. But until now, it has unilaterally adopted, the only country to do so, a non-first use policy. But at the same time, however, it's devoting a large share of its budget to increasing the size and range of its armed forces, particularly nuclear weapons. It is also expanding its military presence at sea. The Chinese Navy is today the largest in the world, and Beijing's military expenditures have been steadily rising for the last 26 years. In 2020, China spent $252 billion in armaments. The United Kingdom recently announced that the previous intention to reduce its nuclear stockpile has instead been raised from 225 to no more than 80. That was the idea before. But now there's been raised to more nuclear weapons in their submarines. And this is due, they say, to non-specified changes in the security environment, including the developing range of technological and doctrinal threats. Well, this is what every nuclear weapon state is doing, developing the range of technological and doctrinal threats. In the nuclear weapon states, the names of official departments that deal with the subject have long shed the word disarmament in favor of arms control, or simply non-proliferation. It seems that they are more worried about consistently bringing new restrictions on civilian nuclear activities in non-nuclear weapon states. So they deal with the weapons that do not exist. And they should be doing, of course, they should be trying to do away with those that already exist. So and again, the mainstream media rarely touches on this subject of nuclear dangers. usually refers to nuclear arsenals as guardians of peace and security, for which there is no substitute. Experts and government officers act as if they are convinced that since deterrence has worked until now, and it will work forever. And I recall what General Lee Butler, former chief of the United States Strategic Command, STRATCOM, declared in a 2015 interview. He said, and I quote, "We escaped the Cold War without a nuclear holocaust by some combination of skill, luck, and divine intervention, probably the latter in greatest proportion. So we're depending on divine intervention to survive." It is strange to see how many high officials become advocates of nuclear disarmament after leaving office in the nuclear weapon states. In their famous 2008 op-ed, Henry Kissinger, George Shultz, William Perry, and some none stated, they said, "Reliance on nuclear weapons is becoming increasingly hazardous and decreasingly effective." And William Perry, in his latest book, said, "Because most people do not understand how serious these dangers are today, their governments are not taking adequate preventive actions that are readily achievable. And so we are drifting towards nuclear catastrophe." That's what Perry said in his book. If governments are not doing what they should be doing to avert that tragedy and make sure it can never happen, it befalls to civil society to do whatever it can to push forward the drive to eliminate the nuclear threat. Only through massive worldwide public pressure can civil society promote changes in the beliefs and attitudes of leaders of nuclear weapon states. This was the case in the early 1980s, when powerful public demonstrations in Europe and the United States forced the two superpowers to negotiate and adopt the INF Treaty. Last June, at the prodding of many civil society organizations all over the world, the presidents of the United States and Russia reaffirmed the principle that has been stated in 1968 by Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev, that, and I quote, "a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought." They also, the two presidents now, Putin and Biden, stated that the shared goals of ensuring stability in the strategic sphere and reducing the risk of armed conflicts and the threat of nuclear war. And we hope that they push forward doing what they promised they would do. But these are wise words that they uttered, and this deserves our encouragement and support. But unfortunately, it's not enough. The intention expressed by Putin and Biden must be complemented by effective action. The joint agreement by Russia and the US to engage in a robust strategic stability dialogue to lay the groundwork for future arms control reduction measures is a constructive beginning, but should not be understood as an end in itself. Rather, it must be a step. Towards finding real solutions to the danger of nuclear weapons. I think civil society has a duty to engage in a strong effort to muster public support for the nuclear weapon ban treaty and for nuclear disarmament. And I hope that this seminar will contribute to that. And I thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very, very much. And especially with your invigorating statement at the end. Yes, we do believe that we want to remember there was civil society pressure in Europe on both sides of the Berlin Wall that led to the INF, and it is civil society pressure that has led to the ban treaty, and it will be civil society pressure that will lead to the abolition and dismantling of nuclear weapons, I'm sure. And if there is a leader that will lead us that way, it is Rebekah Johnson. And Rebekah, I'd like to give you the floor, because that's exactly what you've been for me and for so many others in the past, I'm afraid to say, several decades.
Thank you very much, Lisa. And I would like to very much thank IPB and ICRC for organizing this and reminding us of the anniversary of the Olof Palme Commission, because it was a very important commission raising that whole possibility of thinking about security not as a national security kind of thing, but as a common security of our shared home. And so that's really my starting place. And I'm also delighted that I'm following on from Helen, from Fumi Sensei, from Ambassador Sergio Duarte, to because they've really covered quite a lot of the nitty-gritty ground and allow me to therefore try to take my remarks in a bit of a different direction from perhaps what I'd also intended. So one of the things that I really noted in the Palme Commission was that statement that security in the nuclear age means common security. And as others have said, but I'm going to paraphrase, today, security in this climate, COVID, and nuclear age means collective security for our common survival and to protect our common and shared home. And I think that that's really where the starting point has to be. And, you know, like Helen, I mean, I do a lot of talking around lots of different groups, to local councils, to different kinds of groups on the TPNW, but also as a member of Extinction Rebellion, and particularly the XRP's wing of Extinction Rebellion, talking about the connections there. And I always show the Earth as that beautiful, fragile blue marble, you know, hanging in space. We're all on that blue marble. We're all in that together. And so why are we still so stuck? So I think the really biggest challenges we have, in addition to some of the nitty-gritty challenges that the others have already raised, but I actually think it's an awful lot of people are in denial. We have climate deniers. We have COVID deniers, COVID and vaccination deniers. We have biology deniers who are part of a pandemic of violence against women and girls. And of course, we've had nuclear deniers for a very long time, or at least those who depend on nuclear weapons for deterrence and are in complete denial about all the things that can go wrong. And that was one of the things that we really mobilized as part of the humanitarian reframing of the issue of nuclear disarmament, as we started to move towards, you know, working with diplomats such as Alex and many others, and lots of different civil society organizations, and an increasing number of governments, until we had the tipping point to be able to get the negotiations on the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. So the biggest trend to me is that we still have political deniers at the top of a lot of governments and a lot of bureaucracies and a lot of the power structures. And, you know, and through them, we have denial of those realities that are the challenges we face, our challenges of security, filtering through their persuasion into populations, filtering through a lot of the social media. And really, we have got to recognize, particularly with regard to climate, it might be a little bit slower than if there's nuclear, but climate and nuclear are the two absolutely extinction forms of destruction that we have to stop now. And so then so we really have to start listening more to what the scientists and the risk assessors and the campaigners and the the people who are in touch with reality at the different levels of our society, in order to move forward. Now, one of the other big connections, and Sergio mentioned the UK and the fact that this government has now actually reversed, or at least more explicitly halted its reductions. It was always, arguing that it was the most responsible of the nuclear armed states. So what that means, we can now see they can reverse it. And we now have policies coming up that are actually about increasing the nuclear arsenal by 40% for the nuclear warheads, but also, which Sergio didn't mention, but I think is in many ways much more dangerous, is expanding the the policies on when they consider it legitimate or justified to use nuclear weapons, to include threats that they perceive from high technology, other kinds of technologies, the kinds of things that Helen did mention, and as well as nuclear threats. So they're not narrowing to nuclear and other weapons of mass destruction, and remains to be seen what that means. So I have to say that one of the big threats is nationalism and meism, and all those forms of racism and sexism, and these bizarre inhumane beliefs in, I have to say, many of our countries and cultures, that somehow we, whatever that means, are, whatever it's meant to mean, are superior to others in some ways, either maybe technologically or for other kinds of reasons, and that we can somehow control nature. We can have these dangerous technologies and we can keep control of them forever. I think this is a really major threat, because it leads to the continuation of military, industrial, destructive activities that have brought us to the brink of destruction, brought us to the tipping. Absolutely, we are now on the hair's breadth tipping point on climate, point of no return, and daily bring us to the point of potential disaster with nuclear weapons, because it only takes a mistake, a miscalculation. And we've had quite a lot of those. And we know from other leaders, and Sergio mentioned some of them, we probably avoided nuclear war only through luck, not through nuclear deterrence and strategies and theories. So we are part of nature. We are participants in this beautiful planet, and that's where I both have some hope, because the youngest generation that we have, the really young people, recognize this and are out in the streets and are campaigning and are linking and are connecting across the borders. Just as when I was a lot younger, in the 1980s, under the threat of nuclear war, I lived for 5 years out in the mud and the sleet and the snow at Greenham Common, and made connections with ordinary people like me, ordinary women, children, people. The churches made connections right across in Eastern Europe. And this was being done across a lot of places in Europe. I'm looking at Rainer, knowing the kinds of ways that bridges were made. We need to make that all across the way. So let's also recognize we need to view each other as partners to find solutions, not enemies or rivals trying to blame or bring each other down. We have to recognize nuclear weapons steal resources from us all, but women and indigenous people most of all. They are the forefront of climate destruction in many ways, and they already have continuing, Nagasaki was the last use of a weapon in war against people. But ever since then, through nuclear testing, through nuclear production, through, uranium mining, indigenous people in particular, and also, local people and women have been at the forefront of the misery caused by nuclear production and deployments. So the 9 nuclear armed states and those in so-called security alliances keep insisting on deploying these weapons, and that's a big part of the problem in that relationship. Yes, it was scary when Trump was prime minister, but I like Biden. I liked Obama, but both of them, the truth of the matter is, they fell into that military-industrial trap and ended up becoming incapable of challenging their own military-industrial power structures in order to bring us away from nuclear destruction and to put those resources that are wasted on nuclear weapons into the other major security threats we have. So when I think about policy recommendations for the 2022 Olof Palme Commission, then let me just suggest maybe 4 key things. One is, now that the TPNW has entered into force, we need to make it work, and we need to make it universal. We know that's going to take time. We need the states parties that are growing every month, are growing, beginning at the first meeting of states parties, and I'm looking at Alex here too, to start establishing the institutional and the verification regime that we are going to need to build up and show is going to work. Also, we need to recognize that the TPNW, like the NPT, and like all international law as a whole, these are all necessary parts of our common security, our non-proliferation, disarmament, and peace-building regimes. They are steps. They are normative legal steps. And therefore, the third thing is to recognize that, the treaty and treaties in general are not sort of the opposite of taking the step-by-step process. As a normative legal setting in law, they are all about creating the conditions for further steps to be taken. And as others have said, getting nuclear weapons off hair trigger alert, that's a real priority step. So the final one is just, we need to actually be working much more closely with the climate action networks. The young people tackle nuclear, climate threats, COVID threats together, supporting the most effective and the most needy by finding workable, sustainable solutions for all. And that's where I want to finish.
Thank you, Rebekah. Thank you. I must apologize for not having properly introduced you, because I was, I just took it for granted that everybody knew you, and I'm sorry, I apologize for that. And I also let you go way over time. I'm no longer being a Swiss timekeeper, but let me now move on to Alexander Kment, who is one of the architects of the humanitarian initiative, really, and that's how we all got to know him. And now he is, being an Austrian diplomat and the director of the Disarmament, Arms Control and Non-Proliferation Department at the Austrian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He is also going to be chairing the meeting, which we presume is going to be taking place in January, of the first meeting of the states parties of the TPNW, which we are all inviting our nuclear complicit governments, as they are called, NATO members, to come as observers. Alexander, to you the floor, 8 minutes.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction and for the invitation. Please continue to make the case for participation as observers. Of course, participation as states parties would be better, but short of that, participation of observers would be very important. Thanks for the opportunity to participate in this meeting and discussion today. It's a really great pleasure also seeing so many familiar faces and friends. Some of the points I make have been made by others before. It's not the first time that I'm saying things that Rebekah has said as well, which is not a bad thing, I guess. So I want to start by saying that scientists and experts that study existential risks, which is risks that have the potential of ending life and ending civilization, as we know it, usually refer to 3 scenarios, and they were mentioned. One of it is catastrophic climate change, one of it is a global pandemic, and the other one is nuclear war and the ensuing catastrophic consequences. And the doomsday clock statement of this year, I think, have brought these three issues very nicely together by saying essentially that the current pandemic demonstrates the fragility of our societies, that we are unprepared to manage, nuclear weapons and climate change, and that the current pandemic must be a wake-up call to address these other existential risks. And I think that's extremely important. Now, we are, of course, in the middle of a pandemic, and it's terrible, and it has a great impact on all of us, but it will not wipe out humanity, fortunately. But this, of course, could be different in a future pandemic with a much more aggressive virus. But I believe that the sort of consciousness about global health challenges is greater now than it has been a couple of years ago. The same goes for climate change, which of course is now all around us. For decades, scientists have warned and warned and warned, but most of us have ignored it, and some still ignore, as was just mentioned. But nevertheless, it is now recognized as a key global concern, and urgent action is taken, and we hope that it's not too late. But why is it taken? It's taken because we can see climate change. We can see the Amazon rainforest burning. We can see the islands sinking. We can see the polar caps and glaciers melting. So only after the effects were visible and could no longer be denied was the awareness and preparedness there among humanity to get into action. Of course, this is not the case with nuclear weapons, and far too many still ignore it. I think it was ignorance was mentioned, and denial was mentioned, and I firmly believe that. And I think we believe, we like to believe that nothing will happen. We like to believe that the narrative about nuclear weapons, the alleged security benefits of nuclear deterrence, are worth the risk of having these weapons. We don't see the effects, of course, so we have to look harder to see the effects. We see black and white pictures from Japan 70 years ago. We have to look at some of the places where nuclear weapons were tested, and of course it's not by coincidence that they were tested in very remote places where the impact on the population was on disenfranchised communities mostly. I think we are not well equipped as a species to imagine the end of the world. We much rather look at our sort of daily woes and worry about what we'll have for dinner tonight and think about the existential risks. We deny risks that we tend to see as unlikely or remote. And even though experts tell us that the risks are high. And of course, the problem with nuclear weapons is that we cannot wait until we see the effects, because then it's too late. So what worries me, and previous speakers have referred to it, is of course the nuclear arms race that we see. We cannot be in denial. We see it everywhere. We see the breakdown of the taboo in terms of reckless rhetoric about using nuclear weapons. We see the breakdown of the regime. We see loss of confidence in international relations. We see nuclearism in general being very prevalent. We see the belief in the stability of nuclear deterrence being unquestioned. And we see many new risk drivers. And of course, the new technologies are very much among them. It was also mentioned the impact of artificial intelligence, of hypersonic weapons, the impact of cyber vulnerabilities on all our systems, including nuclear weapon systems. All of this is extremely worrying, and is being mixed up. In the case of security arguments being mixed up with issues of status and power projection. And this is a very dangerous mix. And we see that mostly the public, the wider public, is ignorant about it. And I think this is also by design, because the nuclear weapons discourse has been framed to take place in expert circles, using language that's very complicated and concepts that are hard to relate to the ordinary people, and that fits well with the overall tendency of trying to ignore complicated and unpleasant issues. So, so this was all very negative. Now, is there grounds for optimism? I think it was also mentioned. I think there is grounds for optimism. Partly what the TPNW represents, of course, is a change of discourse about nuclear weapons, and it is based on something that I think is like a global consciousness that is a side effect of the communication revolution, the interconnectedness that we see. Despite all the problems that we see in reality, the world is more interconnected and there's more international cooperation than that there's ever been. So that makes me a little bit more optimistic. But how, of course, it's not enough at all. And how do we change that and how do we make more of it? And I think that is, in the case of nuclear weapons, there are two options. Either we'll change our attitude after something terrible has happened, if we still have the opportunity to do that, or we manage in this one case to do it preemptively. And that has to be through the discourse, through changing the discourse. And this is, I think, where the TPNW now provides some a new tool that we didn't have before. Please, you have to stop me if I'm going overboard. I think we have to stop talking about nuclear weapons in a way that their purpose is not to be used, because that's wrong. The whole concept of nuclear deterrence is based on, first of all, the capabilities, and second, on the credibility of use. And I think part of the ignorance is that most people think, oh, well, they're only to make sure that they're not being used. But of course, the whole edifice of nuclear deterrence is based on the opposite. I think that is very important. It's logically based on the willingness to be used. So we need to talk about what is acceptable, what is legitimate, what is security, and whose security are we talking about? And I think that's very much also where the common security approach comes in. So in terms of policy recommendations, or in terms of discursive proposals and changes that can be made, I think it's trying to get to a much broader discourse about so a more genuine and broad assessment of the risks of nuclear deterrence itself, and weighing the security benefits which are alleged, because we cannot prove it. We can neither prove that it works, nor can we prove that it doesn't work. But we can weigh these alleged benefits against something that we can actually measure, which is the consequences and the risks. And I think that's an extremely important discussion. And there hasn't been much engagement on the possessors and client states yet on that issue. And I think we have to make the case for the realist case for nuclear disarmament, because part of, I think, what maybe, if you look at the nuclear disarmament movement from previous decades, is that the nuclear weapons establishment was successful in framing it that, well, we are the realists, we understand security, and of course it would be nice what these people are saying, but they are idealists, they don't really understand security. And I think with the TPNW and the measurable arguments on the consequences and risks, and the ensuing questions that come with it, I think we can have a very, very strong realist case for nuclear disarmament, whereas the continued belief in the stability provided by nuclear deterrence into the indefinite future, that's a bit more of a dreamer's illusion, and it looks very much like a dogma that like other dogmas in the past, if it's challenged, eventually it will crumble. So
Alexander,
yes,
I need
okay,
to
and that's probably a good policy consideration to end with. And sorry for going over time, but maybe we still have time in the Q&A session to return to some of these issues. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Alexander. We will certainly have time, a little bit of time in the Q&A session afterwards. I was, yes, I very much recognize the idea of us being considered the idealists and they be considered the realists. We've had that. I've had that for decades too. And now it is a great pleasure for me to introduce Srishti Avare, who is a youth leader from the Indian Institute for Peace, Disarmament and Environmental Protection. Srishti, the floor is yours for 8 minutes if you can manage.
Thank you. Yeah, sure. I'll try to cover it up in 8 minutes. Sorry. Good afternoon from India to everybody present here. I'm Srishti, and today's topic is focusing on the disarmament and universal ban of nuclear weapons, and especially focusing on the South Asia. So here basically it is my pleasure to present this presentation before you. And here, what we have achieved till now since a few years is since 1972 to 2008, we have achieved these all aspects here. But the nuclear weapons banning is the most important thing now, because it was the most terrible invention ever, and it is very disruptive. Next, I would like to state IPPNW's report, which states 2 billion people are at risk, and regional internuclear war in South Asia will lead to climatic change, agricultural consequences, and famine. India and Pakistan conflict, it is a time-ticking bomb. It all starts in 2025. Pakistan was once a part of India till 1947 under the British rule. Since partition in 1947, disputes started between the border areas like Kashmir. And it is actually started because of the geopolitical tensions arised in areas like Kashmir and Upper North, basically the northwestern part of India borders. Pakistan is so-called the Muslim majority country, and India is so-called the Hindu majority country. So tensions over contested regions of Kashmir, disputed Kashmir border regions. Indian-Pakistan relations, the war. Indian-Pakistan history of conflicts. This is the timeline, like how many wars we have had since the 1940s to the recent wars of 1920 in regard with the dispute of the Kashmir region. Regional nuclear war in South Asia. Over the last several years, a number of studies have shown that a limited regional nuclear war between India and Pakistan would cause significant eruption worldwide. Considering a war between India and Pakistan involving 100 Hiroshima-sized bombs, less than 0.5% of the world's nuclear arsenal, would result in devastating adverse climatic impacts for several years, and this would happen. Scenario in South Asia, white Pakistan and India. There are many complex reasons for the present nuclear arms race in South Asia. Possession of natural resources, geological and political and religious issues. Indian-Pakistan possesses nuclear bombs. There is a mistrust and misunderstanding and animosity between the two countries. Terrorist attack on Indian Parliament on December 13, 2001 led to heavy built up on and is on the verge of nuclear war. This is quite a simple example of Bombay, the largest city in India. These pictures are of the Taj Hotel in Bombay. taking the terrorist attacks in 2008 by Lashkar-e-Taiba, and Islamist terrorist organization from Pakistan. Not only Indians, but other nationals were also killed. Bombay is the largest city in India, and use of 150 kiloton nuclear bombs over a city like Mumbai could cause up to 8.6 million deaths, and this will start the chain reaction of disaster. Nuclear arms race in South Asia. India and Pakistan nuclear weapons emphasize Kashmir as a flashpoint for three wars and Kargil skirmishes. Any frantic military officer or political leader may start nuclear war. Due to misunderstanding or zealous military officials, nuclear war may start. It only takes 5 to 7 minutes to ascertain the missile-carrying nuclear warhead between the two countries because it's a border dispute. Nuclear neighbors, the Indian-Pakistan arms race. Since gaining independence from Britain in 1947, the South Asian nations have remained bitter foes and have fought several wars over the disputed Kashmir region. Pakistan and India are the two of the 7 additional countries with nuclear capabilities. Together, India and Pakistan possesses 2 of the world's nuclear arsenal, and Pakistan has 165 and compared to 156 according to the latest reports. But they are in an arms race to acquire more weapons. By 2025, India and Pakistan could have expanded their arsenals to 250 warheads each. According to the new paper that predicts what might happen if the two nations entered into a nuclear war. Of course, it is definitely going to impact the whole world globally. What happens if a nuclear war takes place between India and Pakistan? Did my screen go off? Hello? Hello?
Has something gone wrong?
Did my screen go off?
No?
No, it's okay.
Oh, maybe it did.
Now?
Stephanie, can you step in here? Was this your screen?
Shruti, yeah, there you go. It's off now.
It's off. Your time is up as well. Was that intentional?
Yeah, just I would just like to take a minute.
Ah, there it is. There it is. There it is.
Yeah. So there are several consequences of war, from after effects and aftermaths like nuclear winter, firestorm, ozone depletion, impact on marine ecosystem, mass starvation, crop failure, malnutrition, and n number of negative. Like the state, it's on us. When nations threaten to nuke one another, they threaten their own safety too. A nuclear war between two countries would affect everybody in the world, not just where the bombs were dropped. What we can do, these are several pictures what we have done till now under the IIPDEP India. And the people have to be informed and educated. Public education and awareness programs are must. The youth are the future, and youth in such programs is must. Non-violence and peace movement teachings and role of the civil society.
Thank you, Srishti. Oh, okay. Keep on.
Yeah.
Go through to the end quickly, please.
Yeah. I hope this will shock the world into realizing how increasing nuclear arsenals would make the war more dangerous rather than less. Negotiations is the way to solve disagreements, and nuclear weapons are only weapons of mass genocide. I would like to state ban nuclear weapons, engaging and educating youth towards nuclear weapon-free world. And thank you. I stand and appeal for the world peace.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That was very good. Thank you very, very much, Srishti. Sorry about the difficulty with the screen sharing and so on. We now have a little bit less time than we were supposed to have, but that's my fault, for the question and answer session. I have already seen 4 questions, which I can direct to the people. One of them is to all, but perhaps I could start with the questions to Alexander. The first question to Alexander is, how would common security contribute to the goals of the TPNW? But there is also a second question specifically to Alexander from Joseph Gerson, which relates to what it's a longer question, which I will let him read in the chat, with a very interesting quote from C. Wright Mills. But basically the question is, what do you expect from the first conference of the member state parties to the TPNW? So I think we can ask Alexander to answer those first 2 questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. And because I was too long in my presentation, I will be very brief here. Does common security contribute to the goals of the TPNW? Yes, undoubtedly, but I think it's more the other way around. The TPNW contributes to the goals of common security. I see a direct intellectual connection from common security to human security. And of course, the TPNW is very much out of the human security and humanitarian disarmament tradition. So it's very much linked. And I think it's based on the whole idea that nuclear weapons as such are unacceptable because the consequences are too grave and the risks are too considerable. So it's not directed against any particular state, or it doesn't go into geopolitical differentiations. It looks at the weapons itself and its impact, and therefore it is a sort of globalist common security approach as such. So I think very much so is my answer to the question. The longer question I understood was how can civil society best prepare for the first meeting of states parties, and what are the expectations? I mean, it's a very contested space, and I think the best indication for the transformative potential of the TPNW is the ferocity with which the opponents try to counter it and undermine it. So I think it's very important that the first meeting of states parties is a very serious meeting, that we are confident about the arguments on which the treaty is based, and that we focus on that and on the implementation. And so far the consultations have been going extremely well. And that also is my sort of plea to civil society to, this is not, I don't see this as a meeting to sort of make all the points and finger pointing and whatever you always wanted to say about the policies of nuclear weapon states, but never dared to do. I think it's supposed to be a positive meeting. That this is a new conversation about nuclear weapons based on extremely compelling arguments. So I hope that civil society will also approach it in that way. And we, of course, we need these conversations. We need the engagement on the arguments of the TPNW, which therefore, which so far hasn't really happened as much. So civil society, just as much as states parties, need to be confident about the arguments, but need to be welcoming at the same time, ensuring that we create opportunities for this extremely important discussion. And I'm, for my part, convinced that the more we actually have this conversation, the less defensible the current nuclear status quo and nuclear policies become. So I'm very confident about the transformative potential of the arguments that we have. So that would be my answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That is a wonderful answer. Thank you very much. I also agree with your words of advice to us all, but I'm sure most of us did not need the need to hear from you that we must not be finger pointing and so on, but that we want to invite them along and so on. I'm sorry, that was a confused comment from me. But the next question I saw there was from Helen to all. So whoever wishes to answer this, how can we keep these issues on the agenda, bearing in mind that we don't want to tell the story in such a scary way that we scare the youth away from the possibility? I think perhaps Rebekah, Sergio, I don't know who wishes to tackle this question first.
And Lisa, actually, as a question asker, can I just flag the reason why I think this is, I really want to make the most of this group of people that are both knowledgeable, brilliant, but also have experience, constantly working out. You do short film clips like I showed at the start that press upon us the danger. We've done other film clips that are more about, you know, this would destroy the things you love and trying to look at positive things. But how do we collectively about not wagging our finger in a hand that goes like this and invites? It's really similar to what Alex was saying. So I'd just love to hear this group.
Let me, what we do here is this was done, the TPNW ourselves to the status quo. And that's
to, as you said, reach out. I think it is really that we stand or fall by how much we cooperate, not how many weapons we have of any, that we recognize the kind of interestedness. So whenever we speak, that we actually connect. Every single time we speak about nuclear weapons, we connect with what that particular audience is concerned about, whether it's COVID or climate or poverty, the costs, asylum seekers, and so on, because this is one of the ways of speaking to and engaging and showing nuclear weapons, they not only steal resist from tackling all of those issues, they're completely irrelevant for security, or as, you know, a former foreign minister, one of the only good ones we had, Robin Cook, said, they're worse than irrelevant. And so getting rid of and the resources for tackling everything else.
Thank you, Rebekah. Does someone else want to? I see that Alexander gave us a reply in the chat. I'm of a different generation. I have trouble watching you, listening to you, and reading the chat all at the same time.
Something here. I think what we have to do, and we have been doing that, is to write as much as we can about these issues in our own countries, and if possible, media that people compatibility between the treaty and the NPT, and to do away and to contest some of the reasoning that has been being spread by the nuclear weapon states about the incompatibility between these two instruments. On the contrary, they are complementary, and they should be taught as such. They should be seen as such. And I think we have to write in the media, in the possible, in every publication that we can about these issues. I think this is the only way in which civil society can muster enough. And we have to work together. Organizations should not work one to its own side. We should try to get together. When the civil society got together and worked as a team, we got the ban treaty. We got the nuclear ban treaty, and this is an example that should be followed. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Yes, yes. I'm glad that's invigorating, and that even though that's coming to the end of our time, that's a good point to make to conclude. Unless there is something, I still have to give the floor to my co-president, Philip, who is entitled to 5 minutes to sum everything up. I don't know how he's going to do it, but I have great faith in him. And so unless there is something absolutely burning at the tip of your tongues, all our wonderful panelists and others, I will give the floor to Philip. Nothing burning. Philip, to you. And then you close, please, as well.
Okay. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you all the panelists for your contributions, your thoughts, policy proposals and ideas to build momentum. We have a task to deliver. A new global commission has been established on common security 2022 to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the publication of the original report, Common Security, a Blueprint for Survival. And I think it's very instructive that on the cover of the book that I have is a picture of civil society mobilizing against the proliferation of nuclear weapons at the time that the first report was produced. Today's work will feed into the work of the Commission. It will be part of the website. It will inform the content of the report that we will be producing as a Commission. And I'd like to thank everybody for the time that they have taken and the ideas that they've expressed. A number of observations I'd like to make. First of all, world at a turning point, the world at a tipping point. We are going backwards. We are drifting. Hence, this report has to have a sense of urgency. The doomsday clock was 100 seconds to midnight. Now, when the Olof Palme Commission began its work in 1980, it was a whole 7 minutes. Nuclear weapons are continue to be a menacing shadow over our civilization. We are saying that they are the most discriminate, the most destructive, most indiscriminate, most inhuman, most immoral, and now illegal weapons in human civilization. The human consequences are catastrophic. The environmental consequences are catastrophic, all of which underline the existential threat that they pose. What we have to do is to break the denial, break the ignorance, and to break the belief that everything is fine with the current state of affairs. When we look at common security, what we have at the moment is a sense that mutual destruction is winning over any process of thinking towards building our common security. There is a new urgency. What are the new dynamics that we see that inform the new commission that is established? We haven't mentioned it today, but strategic competition across the board. Strategic competition in the nuclear field, in the economic field, in the military field, technology field, and in the field of democracy and beliefs. This is far away from a sense of common security. We see a polarized political discourse, which is something I don't think the original report looked at in enough detail, but we need to see this now. We have what is new for this commission is the knowledge of the consequences which Helen so eloquently talked about in the midst of the COVID-19 global pandemic, which gives us a sense of proportion and the sense of failure which we face. What I think is new is the new global fault lines. The original report was about East-West. When we look at the world now, we have more fingers on the trigger, 9 nuclear powers, 26 hosts, and we have all these global fault lines in place, which means a much more global look at the situation of common security in the current global context. The architecture of control has disappeared. Sergio mentioned the restraints are weakening or even being severed. We have a new arms, a new investment, $1.9 trillion in military expenditure, 72 billion of which is on nuclear weapons each year. I think in the US, the program of nuclear renewal reaches something like $1.7 trillion. And on top of that, the United Kingdom has decided to send a message to the world that they're going to increase their nuclear warheads by 40%. This is wrong, this is discouraging, and it means that the stakes for us are growing higher. The digital and cybersecurity concerns have been mentioned, as has the creeping feasibility of the use of these weapons in conflict situations, on top of all the other worries that you've all mentioned about the danger of use, about non-state actors, about miscalculation, misreading, accidents. Those worries have always been with us and never left us. I think it's important we also have to consider what is the message to the Commission from what we are saying. And I think we can remind ourselves about what Olaf Palme said all of those years ago, and I think they're still relevant today. And we have to drive this message home. And he said that no victors in a nuclear war, that this commission concluded it was impossible to win a nuclear war and dangerous for states to pursue policies or strategies based on the fallacious assumption that a nuclear war might be won. This is relevant today for the new commission. Deterrence cannot be made foolproof. This is relevant today. That nations must abandon doctrines and preparations for fighting limited nuclear war as a matter of deliberate policy, relevant today. That nuclear deterrence cannot provide at the long-term basis for peace, stability, and equity in international society. It must be replaced by the common security. And the most telling conclusion that struck me was the conclusion, and I quote, is therefore inevitably that nuclear weapons must be eliminated. Eliminated is what they said. And what everybody has said today, message was relevant then and is even more relevant today. We talked about other issues that the dimension must address. I think strategic competition needs to be addressed. And our sense would be, well, strategic cooperation. We need to go deeper into not just the global dimension as a commission, East, West, yes, the Korean Peninsula, India, Pakistan, Iran and the JCPOA, and of course, USA, China, and the South China Sea tensions. The original report was very much focused on East-West. This new report and a new commission has to embrace a much broader discourse in terms of the global impact of what we are seeing to try and fix and reset global geopolitical relations. We need to look at nuclear postures, and I think in the commission we will have to do an event such as this, looking particularly at Asia and Pacific. Palmer 1 talked about a downward spiral and a downward momentum. And I think what we've heard today is a whole series of ideas about how we can bring about a downward spiral and downward momentum. People have talked about putting on the brakes. They talked about putting de-escalation. Helen introduced the idea of all this the other dimensions of the conversation about hair trigger controls, about other policy matters. We need to talk about reducing stockpile, reducing warheads, improving surveillance and verification, cutting expenditure and cutting investment, to question the expansion and to question the nuclear postures. We have to look again at what is the kind of architecture of control in the sense of common security that we could produce. There are no source of alternative thinking here. Our alternatives are real, and I think they have weight. From the elders to the UN, to civil society, the labor movement, the environmental movement, the peace movement, the religious movements and church, to the mayors of peace. There are other alternative ideas. These need oxygen, and I hope they find their place in this piece. There are new ideas we can use, our leverage, question the investment. When we look at the world's polluters, it's about 90 companies involved. If we look at nuclear production and the business models behind it, this is a manageable number to question the investment that we see. We have, therefore, like this idea that we see that we have this new dimension of the TPNW. Alexander's got this great job We're going to come there and rejoice. We will criticize the world, Alexander. We will make a noise. Let's get tens of thousands of people in the street of Austria. Our message to the world is that we have an alternative, that this is the alternative. And don't let politicians sleep and lie to us about how secure we should be sleeping at nights when these menacing, indiscriminate, immoral, and now illegal weapons are present. Indeed, we have to change the narrative. We have to stop the denial, so to speak. And I think we have a job to do to develop that story, that narrative, and the tales that we can tell about what this means. Nagasaki, Hiroshima experience, of course. Shristi, our young voice. We have young commissioners in this commission, eloquent, bringing home to us the message about what this means for future generations. So these are just a few thoughts for us to hinge our work going forward. I thank the panelists. I thank the IPP office. COVID-19, we're talking about build back better. We cannot build back better when we are spending $1.9 trillion on our military and we have 14,000 nuclear weapons on this planet. It's time to reimagine our world, and that's the challenge to this commission. Time to reimagine, time to apply the brakes. It's time to prohibit and eliminate these nuclear weapons. I am delighted that we have the TPNW, which gives us a hook. There is a big responsibility on civil society. We have to raise our voice and mobilize our people once again. We are being challenged. At the very first meeting, we were challenged by one of the original members of the commission. The world needs a wake-up call. We have to provide that wake-up call. Therefore, the responsibility that we have to convey this narrative, to get out of the state of denial, to bring together all strands of civil society in a common unified voice for elimination of these weapons is a responsibility which we must deliver. We cannot afford to fail in this endeavor. Finally, I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity. No more Nagasaki, no more Hiroshima. Let the final words of the new commission's report say, let Nagasaki be the last. Thank you.
I would like to thank everyone. I'll come back in again. I thought Philip was going to thank you all and say goodbye, but I will thank you all for being with us. Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you all the other people who were here. And goodbye. I'm waving goodbye to everybody.
All right. Thank you.